everybody, it's Lori again, and welcome back to my kitchen. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. Now, I am not the least bit Irish. Mostly I'm Norwegian, but I'm not Irish at all, but I love St. Patrick's Day just simply because of the fact that I love corned beef. And generally, you can, if you look around, you can find corned beef roasts on sale at this point in time of the year in your grocery store. Now, I was lucky enough to find some on sale. I'm not saying that the price was super good. You know, prices on everything have risen right now, but for the current prices, I found a pretty decent price on this sale. And so I picked up a few of them, and I'll probably pick up a few more if I still see them later on in the week too. But anyway, so this is the time of year that you can find it on sale. And I would like to share today with you how I can corned beef in our home. Now, one thing that I would like to say just starting out is when you purchase a corned beef brisket roast, generally inside the package, you will find one of these little pickling spice packets. Now, I love the taste of the pickling spice with corned beef. And if I prepare a roast in my crock pot, I will sprinkle those pickling spices on. But the reason being is because at the end of the cooking period in my crock pot, I can then take a spoon or a spatula and kind of scrape all of those pickling spices off of the roast. I do not use the pickling spices in my jars when I'm canning, simply because there's no way of removing them. And I personally just don't like taking a bite of, let's say, a Reuben sandwich and crunching into pickling spices. It's just not something that I enjoy. And so I leave the pickling spices out when I'm canning. Now, if you want to add the pickling spices, that's absolutely fine. It's totally your preference. There's no safety issue doing that. There's no flavor issue doing that. So if you want to add the pickling spices, just know that you have the creative freedom to do that. I just choose not to because I don't want to crunch down into them. All right, so today I would like to share with you how I raw pack just plain corned beef. I use this primarily in Reuben sandwiches because I'm just a huge fan of Reuben sandwiches. You know, home fermented sauerkraut, Swiss cheese, Thousand Island dressing, you know the deal. Anyway, I just love them. And so that's why I snag up all these roasts when they're on sale, is because then I can tuck these finished jars of just plain corned beef away on my shelves, and we can have Reuben sandwiches whenever I'm in the mood for it. The guys really like them too. But anyway, so I'm going to show you how I raw pack my corned beef, just plain. I also would like to show you how I can corned beef hash. Now, corned beef hash, as probably all of you know, is just a combination of corned beef roast and potatoes. And generally it's fried in a pan, you know, a cast iron pan or a frying pan, whatever. You fry it in a pan, and it's served oftentimes as a breakfast food, you know, alongside eggs and toast and things like that. So I'll show you how I personally do that in our home. And the last one I would like to share with you is kind of a variation of an Irish stew that I make, and that consists of the corned beef, potatoes, and carrots. Oh, and cabbage. I almost forgot the cabbage. I think I did that the other day on another video too. I forgot the cabbage, but there's cabbage in this stew also. So anyway, I'm going to page down, and I'll just kind of start walking you through the process of the three items. I'm going to start with the raw pack corned beef roast. So let's get your page down onto my working surface here. Now, you can see that I already have my corned beef sliced into chunks. When I open my package of corned beef, you know, they usually come with quite a bit of the brine in there. And I do, when I open my package, first of all, I remove my little spice packet out of there. And then I just kind of rinse it quickly in clear water in the sink, just simply because I don't like working with all that slimy stuff. Now, if you choose not to rinse your roast off, that's fine, not a problem at all. Another thing that I will, though, encourage you to do is when you get a roast beef that has one side of the roast beef maybe has quite a bit of fat on it, I do encourage you to slice off the majority of that fat. Cut off, just large portions of fat. Now, a corned beef brisket usually has quite a bit of fat throughout the pieces, okay? And you're not going to remove all of that, but if you have a huge chunk of fat on one side of the roast, go ahead and slice that off and remove it. So when I am raw packing any meat, including the corned beef brisket, I pack my meat as tightly as possible inside of my jar. The reason that I do this is because just like any other raw food, meat does shrink, okay? So you want to pack that jar very, very tightly. We're not going to add any fluid to a raw packed meat because in the canning and cooking process, that meat renders its own juice. So there's no need to add added fluid when you're packing raw meat. So this is just a simple thing. This method of packing goes for anything: chicken, venison, beef, raw turkey, raw rabbit, any raw meat. I would encourage you to just pack as tightly in your jar as you can. So I'm just going to get my funnel out of the way, and what I do is I literally, you guys, I squish this. I just squish the heck out of this. You're going to hear some burping and whatever with the air being pushed out of there, but you really pack that meat tightly into your jar, okay? So I think that this actually looks, I estimated really good on my handfuls. This looks really good. I generally pack my raw meat at about 1.25 inches or 1.5 inches headspace, okay? But make sure that it's packed in there super, super tight. Okay, so that one's done. We're gonna move on to the next one and pack that one. Now, if you want to, you can kind of compress your meat halfway through the pack also of your jar. I don't even think I really need to have the funnel. All right, to 1.25 inches headspace, as you can see there. Okay, we'll get one more completed on the raw pack. Now we're not, like I said, we're not going to add any additional fluid to these jars at all. This meat will create its own juice inside of the jar as it cooks during the canning process. Really squish them in there. I'm wondering if we have just a little too much in that jar. There, that feels better to me. All right, we've got those packed and we'll just set them aside. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to the corned beef hash. And that is just with the potatoes and the corned beef. And what I do with this is I pack this pretty much the same way that I raw pack my beef stew. Now, as I mentioned, this is all solid raw meat, and this will create enough juice to cover itself in the jar. With vegetables, a combination of vegetables and raw meat, this is my little trick on how to know what to add to the jar as far as liquid is concerned. For my hash, for my corned beef hash, I generally put about halfway full of fresh raw cut potatoes, okay? And I kind of settle them in there, kind of like your dry packing potatoes. Settle them down in there a little bit to about half of your jar. I do approximately a 50-50 mixture of potatoes and meat, okay? But this is where the trick comes in. Now, when we add our raw meat on top of these potatoes, we know that that raw meat is going to create enough fluid to cover itself, but it is not going to create enough fluid to cover itself and the potatoes. So what I do is I do add a little bit of water to the potatoes itself. And this is the reason why I pack the potatoes first. Instead of putting the meat on the bottom, I put the meat on the top so that I know exactly how much water I need to cover these potatoes. And I will fill this with water, or if you want to use broth, you go ahead and use broth of your choice. But what I will do is I will cover these potatoes to within about 1/4 inch less than the top of the potatoes. Okay, so just fill with broth or water to 1/4 of an inch less than the total amount of potatoes that you have in there. So now this water looks a little weird, and I'll tell you what this is. For the stew that is coming up, I blanched my cabbage, and this is actually my cabbage blanching water. And instead of tossing this out, I'm going to use this as my fluid in both my corned beef hash and also my my stew jars. So we're just going to pour in enough fluid to come to 1/4 of an inch less than the top of those potatoes. That looks about right. Hopefully you can see. I don't know, you know, these lights in here, you guys. But anyway, my fluid level, even though the camera might not be picking it up, the fluid level is right here. So it's about 1/4 of an inch underneath the top of the potatoes. Now, after I have done that, I am simply going to press on my raw corned beef on top of that until I reach that same 1 1/4 to 1 1/2 inch headspace in this jar. All right, so there we have our potatoes with fluid covering them and our raw meat on top, which will cook and render its own meat. Which will cook and render its own juice. I'm sorry, sometimes I have these little brain glitches and I don't know what happens. But anyway, you know, sometimes it's kind of hard to stand here and talk to myself. But anyway, so there, this is what your pack should look like for the corned beef hash. So let's do another one of those quickly. We've got our raw cubed potatoes, and I do have them soaking in water. Okay, and that's just to keep your raw potatoes from turning dark before you can them. So I do suggest after you cut them that you do put them into water just to keep them fresh looking. So we'll settle that down. Now another little thing I will show you that I have no problem doing this. The water that I do have my potatoes in, I will go ahead and I can use that also to cover those potatoes to 1/4 of an inch less than the top of the potatoes. Then we are going to go ahead and press in our raw corned beef. All right, and there we are at about 1 1/4 inch headspace. I'm going to set this one aside. Now, if, let's say, you have already cooked your corned beef roast and you happen to have leftovers and you're wondering, what am I going to do with all of these leftovers? Number one, you can go ahead and you can pack it like your raw meat, not as tight. Pack your cooked meat a little bit looser and then cover it with broth. Whenever you're doing cooked meats, you need to cover it with broth. So use the drippings in the crock pot, or if you baked it in the oven, use the drippings that are in the pan. If you don't have enough drippings, add just a little bit of water to it. But anyway, you can put that cooked corned beef into your jar and then cover it with broth, and you will PC or hot water bath just the same as if it was raw. But I will show you too that if you have a cooked corned beef roast, you can use it to make your corned beef hash. And so what I do is, again, I just use raw potatoes. I prefer to always pack my potatoes raw, and we will settle that down into the jar. Now, the difference between the raw pack and what I'm going to do now is used pre-cooked corned beef. With the raw pack, remember I only had you fill fluid up to a little short of the potatoes. If I'm going to put cooked corned beef in on top of this, I need to cover the entire contents with fluid because that cooked corned beef isn't going to render any of its own juices. It's already rendered them. So let me grab here is my leftover cooked corned beef, okay? And so what I do is I add the same level of potatoes, and then I'm just going to pack in my pre-cooked corned beef here. And I'm not going to pack that down, like I said. When you're doing pre-cooked meats, don't pack them as tightly as what you did your raw meat. They need a little bit of room for the fluid to be able to flow through them. And I'm just going to take the drippings that were in my pan, and I'm going to fill the entire contents of the jar with these pan drippings. Okay, I'm going to pause for just 1 second, and I'm going to grab a butter knife, and I will be right back. All right, guys, so I went and I grabbed a butter knife, and the reason why I did that is because I want to debubble this just a little bit to make sure that the fluid has flowed all the way throughout the jar and there's no great big air pockets trapped. Now, I didn't have quite enough pan drippings, and so I'm going to just add a little additional water to complete filling the jar. And then again, I'm just going to make sure that there is no air trapped anywhere underneath that cooked corned beef. Okay, so I have filled the entire contents with the cooked meat and the potatoes. The entire contents need fluid. With raw pack, you only need fluid to cover the potatoes. So here is your pre-cooked corned beef hash pack. All right, so we're going to set that aside. And I will get this out of the way. We will move on to our Irish stew. Now with Irish stew, you can use either raw meat or your previously cooked meat also, but the same rules apply. If you're going to pack raw meat in there, only cover your vegetables with fluid. The raw meat will finish filling the jar. So what I do is I've got a few carrots. I'm just going to get them in the jar. And then what I like to do is I like to put my cabbage in next. And with cabbage, whenever you're canning cabbage, blanch or steam your cabbage so that it gets flexible and easier to stuff into your jar. And it also reduces the volume a little bit so that that raw cabbage isn't taking up so much space in your jar. So I'm going to add my blanched cabbage to this. Now I am working, as you can see, I'm working with only pint jars today. So if you're working with quarts, you know, you'll obviously be able to fit a little bit more in than what I can, but I've got to be pretty reserved in how much I'm putting into my jar so that I can get all of my ingredients in. I'm going to move my canner over and just set this here for a minute. All right, so we have our raw carrots, we have our blanched cabbage. I'm going to throw in a few of these potatoes. And then I'm going to elect, and with your corned beef hash, you can put some raw onions, you know, like chopped raw onions in if you prefer to do that. I don't really like onions in my hash, but I do like a little bit of onion flavor in my Irish stew. And so I have some home dehydrated powdered onion here, and I'm just going to add about a half teaspoon of home dehydrated powdered onion. And then we're just going to pack our raw meat on top of that. You know what I did, guys? I'm getting ahead of myself. I forgot to put my fluid in there. I do apologize. I seem to be a little bit spacey tonight. So I'm going to get that back out of there and I'm going to add my fluid. This time I'm going to definitely use my cabbage blanching water because I really want that cabbage flavor in that stew. So we're going to do the same thing, just add enough fluid to just about 1/4 inch below the level of those veggies. Make sure we're packed down in there. I might debubble that a little bit because you do have that layer of blanched cabbage in there. So you want to make sure that the fluid has gotten through that layer of cabbage. All right, that is looking good. Here, I'll let you see where we're at here. We've got the carrots and the cabbage and the potatoes on top of that, and fluid to 1/4 inch less than the top of the level of the vegetables. All right, now we're going to get that meat back in the jar. I wonder if I have a small piece here. Let me see what I got over here. Got a whole nother bowl cut. That's a smaller piece. There. I like how that one fit in there. Okay, so we've topped that with the rest of our meat. And that again is 1 1/4 inch headspace. All right, so let's get another one of those stews packed. Got a few carrots in there. Then we're going to put our cabbage in. Kind of settle and pack that a little bit. All right, and then we're going to get some potatoes in on top of that. And my 1/2 teaspoon of onion. Now you can put whatever whatever spices you really prefer to have. You just put your own taste into your canning, okay? All I really want is I want a little additional onion in mine, and then I'm going to call it a day and be happy with it. But if you want to add other seasonings, Italian seasoning, oregano, whatever, you just be creative and do your own thing. All right, now we're going to add that fluid. I'm not going to forget, like I did last time, and have to take my meat back out of the jar again. To 1/4 inch less than the top of the veggies. And I'm going to debubble a little bit to make sure that that fluid has gotten through that layer of cabbage. I might add just a touch more. There we are, good. Now, if you wanted to use, I don't think I have enough of the cooked corned beef left, but maybe I'll pack the last one, the stew with the cooked corned beef, just to show you what I do for the cooked variety. You know, I don't think I'm going to be able to fit one more in there at all. All right, we're going to call that pack good. Set that one aside, and we'll get on to our final stew. Our final stew jar here. So a few of those carrots. Actually, that worked out really well. I prepared just enough. And then let's get that cabbage in on top of those. Settle that in just a little bit, and let's finish with some potatoes on top of that. Okay. Get our onion. And then I'm going to add my fluid to make sure my veggies are covered. And then I don't have to work quite as hard to get that debubbled after I put my meat in. Now with the cooked meat, like I said, you're going to have to fill the whole jar up with fluid. So this time we're not going to scant it, but we'll just get that filled up to the top of the veggies before I put my cooked corned beef in. Well, that worked out very nicely, guys. All right, so I filled my fluid level up to the veggies, and then I put my cooked corned beef in, and I'm going to add just a little bit more fluid because remember, like I said, you want fluid covering your cooked meats also. So we'll just add just a touch more of that wonderful cabbage blanching water and make sure that it's just kind of flowing throughout everything and covering everything really well. And that looks really, really good. Okay, so like any other canning project, you're gonna have a mess like me. I'm sorry guys, I tell the truth. Anyway, like any other canning project, now what you're gonna do is you're gonna take a clean laundered wet cloth and just wipe those rims really well to make sure that you've got all the grease and food particles off of there. Now I've prepared 9 pints today because that is what will fit in a single layer in my Miro canner. And these are regular mouth jars. Now wide mouth, I wouldn't be able to fit that many into the Miro canner, but since they're all regular mouth jars, I can fit 9 in a single layer. Okay, we've got those cleaned off really good. And just like normal, you're just going to then place your lid and your ring fingertip tight. Don't overthink it. Whenever I'm, explaining to people how to tighten their lids, just don't overthink it, guys. Just fingertip tight, a little bit of resistance, but you don't want to crank them. And off into the canner they go. Now, all of my food items, my jars, my canner water are all at room temperature today. Always match your food items, your jar, and your canner at the same temperature. Hot goes with hot, cold goes with cold. So everything today is at room temp. I'm going to do a little experiment here. Yeah, I didn't think so. Okay, it looked like I had enough room in the canner. Sometimes it depends on the style of your jars. There's square jars and there's round jars. And sometimes, depending on the style of your jars, you can kind of finagle things. And once in a while, you can fit another one in there. But I only have square jars left today. I've used all round jars, and this square jar just is not going to nestle down in there. But I was hoping. Okay, so we are just going to place our canner lid, And I'm going to start the burner and get my canner warming up. Oh, let me get you up here a little bit more. Okay. I'm going to start my stove and get my canner warming up over medium heat. I really prefer to heat my canner a little bit on the slower side because it avoids some of those overflow and siphoning issues. So I suggest that you heat it over medium heat and not high heat. I'm going to bring my canner to a full vent. I will vent for 10 minutes. Then I will place my weight, bring my pressure canner up to pressure, and I will pressure can these pints of corned beef and corned beef hash and Irish stew. All of them get canned for 75 minutes by the PC. If you would like to do this in quart-sized jars, you would pressure can them for 90 minutes. If you would like to hot water bath any of these items, and it doesn't matter what size jar, whether it is a pint or a quart, you would hot water bath for 3 hours. So I'm going to get my canner going, and I will come back after the process is complete and I'll show you the lovely results. Okay, so I got through my pressure canning session and I allowed my canner to cool down naturally. I cracked it open just a little bit and allowed it to cool for another 10 minutes. Pushed the lid back just a little bit more like what you see now and allowed it to cool for another 10 minutes. So now I feel like I can remove the lid completely and we will get our jars out of the canner. All right, I can see a stew one right there, first coming out. Look at how beautiful that is. And this looks like it is one of the corned beef hash, the potatoes and meat. You can see, like I said, how the meat fills the rest of the jar. It renders juice and fills up the jar. And this looks like it was maybe that pre-cooked corned beef. There's another one of the Irish stews. Here's a raw pack meat. Right there's the raw pack meat. Everything looks great. All right, so I'm going to finish unloading the canner here. I'm already hearing lids popping. And we will just leave these on the counter to cool. We're not going to touch them until they've cooled completely and sealed. And I'll just leave them overnight to allow that to happen. And then tomorrow, after they've cooled off, I will come back and pop one or two of them open for you so that you can see the texture results of these wonderful goodies. So I will see you soon. Good morning, everyone. I am still working on coffee this morning. Got a little late last night while I was canning and recording, and I do apologize if I seemed a little bit flighty. It was the very end of the day. It was about 11 o'clock, and I think that I was extremely tired. So I need a little kick in the seat of the pants this morning. All right, so overnight, my jars cooled and sealed. I had 100% seal rate again. I really strongly feel that that is because of two things. One, because of the canning lids that I use, which is the 4 Jars brand. I love my 4 Jars lids. And the second reason is due to headspace. Very important to watch your headspace. And this is why I was explaining about only adding the fluid over the vegetables and allowing your meat to finish filling the jars. If you're using raw meat pack and you add additional water to that raw meat pack, there's going to be too much fluid in that jar by the end of the processing and cooking time, and you will have overflow issues. The combination of adding water and the juice that the meat renders, it boils up and out of the jar. So fluid level does matter, and particularly when you're working with raw meat, I just really strongly suggest don't add any additional fluid at all with raw meat. Your cooked meat, yes, add fluid. That cooked meat needs that fluid to protect it in the canning process because it's already cooked, it's already rendered its own juices. And if you put cooked meat into a canning jar and do not add any fluid, it's going to burn and dry out. So that's my explanation on that. I have already taken my screw-on bands off and I have washed up my jars in the sink. So I'm going to page down so that you can see these lovely, lovely jars of corned beef and, the stew and the hash. Oops, and then I'm going to have camera problems because I'm still not very awake and alert this morning, but I got to get this done because we have other things to do today. All right, so here is our raw packed, just plain corned beef. And you can see, even though I trimmed off the additional flat fat from the roast, corned beef, as I showed you the raw chunks, corned beef a lot of times has a lot of fat marbling throughout the meat. And so you are going to get a little bit of a fat cap. No matter what you do, you're just going to get that. And there's no problem with that at all. I have a little bit of a fat cap on all of my jars, but you can see that at the top of this raw packed corned beef. But you can see that also now, with my raw packed meat, I added no fluid at all. And look at that, fluid level has covered the meat completely. So that's why I say add no fluid with raw packed meat. Now this is the corned beef hash. And we filled the fluid level to within just a little less than the top of the potatoes. And then the meat renders the rest of its own juice. And look at how lovely that is. All of them completely are just filled beautifully. Same thing here with our stew. Now we had all of our raw vegetables in the bottom of the jar, which we added fluid to and packed our raw meat on top of it. And you can see that fluid level? The meat rendered enough fluid to finish filling the jar as it cooked. But look at how lovely this Irish stew is. You can see your carrots in there and your potatoes and cabbage and meat. I think that this is one of the jars that I want to open and just show you the results of this morning. Let me see. We'll get things moved around. Give myself a little more workspace here. So I'm going to pop a top. And I'm going to drain out just so that you, well, actually, you know what, with the stew, I guess I don't really need to do that. You should be able to see all of the veggies and the textures, even with the juice in there. All right, let's get this where you can see it. Look at how lovely those carrots are. And the potatoes, I'll go ahead and since it's on top here, look at these carrots, you can stick them, they'll stay right on your fork. Here's a potato. That stays on your fork. Now your cabbage is, of course, going to be soft because cabbage is a pretty fragile vegetable, but still there is consistency there with your cabbage. It's not mush. That's all cabbage. And then we'll get down to that corned beef. Look at this beautiful chunk of corned beef. Absolutely marvelous. This is just a fun and wonderful stew to make with the corned beef. Gorgeous, gorgeous results. Alrighty, the corned beef hash, I guess I showed you what the consistency of the potatoes are. I showed you what the consistency of the meat is, so I don't know that I really need to open up any of my other jars, because everything that we used in all 3 of these canning applications, everything that we used is technically in this stew. Now, for the plain corned beef, when you're packing it raw, it will hold its shape, it will stay together, but in the application of like using it in a Reuben sandwich, you can also take and you can kind of shred it with your fork. Let's see if I can find another one here. You can kind of mush it, shred it, pull it apart, whatever, in a raw pack, and that will make it so that you can put it on your sandwich a lot easier, and you won't have all these great big chunks in your sandwich. So even though the consistency is that it will stay together on your fork, it's also tender enough that you can really kind of squish it apart for your Reuben sandwiches. These make wonderful sandwiches. I don't know if you guys can tell or not, but I love Reubens. I think I've mentioned them like 4 times during this video. But anyway, let's get you paged up here. So, I hope that this was informative. I hope that it gives you the courage to try it in your own homes. When I am using the corned beef hash, I'll just pop a top and drain the juice off, and then dump the potatoes and the meat into my frying pan and fry it up for the corned beef hash. You know, you can save that brine, that juice that was in that jar, and use that in another soup, or, you know, whatever you want to, or you can discard it. You know, it doesn't matter. That's just completely up to you. But that's how I use the hash. So I, again, will say happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. I wish you well in the coming weekend. And until we meet again, God bless you all, and happy canning, everybody.